Since COVID struck, the Australian government has racked up about $300 billion worth of extra debt.
Keeping the economy afloat through the COVID-19 pandemic instead caused the biggest budget deficit since the Second World War.
So who's going to pay for it? And how bad is it really? Think of the budget as a pot of money the government gets from our taxes and its investments, which it then spends on roads, healthcare, schools, defence, welfare, and a whole heap of other services. The government often spends more than it gets from our taxes, and that's called a deficit. In fact, Australia has run deficits almost every year since 1901, and budget experts say that's okay, despite what the politicians say.
Joe Hockey has doubled the deficit, adding $68 billion.
Debt, which we inherited, was rising faster than a jet fighter.
You'd think that we could get more bang for buck for the $1 trillion in debt that they've racked up.
Look, it is a little bit simplistic, and it is clear that deficits are not inherently bad. If you think of something like COVID, what would the world have looked like if we didn't have the government roll out the JobKeeper program, the boost to job seeker? Many, many thousands of businesses would have gone to the wall. We would have seen unemployment rates, 15, 20%. So you want the government in there as kind of a shock absorber, running deficits to cushion the impact of big economic shocks.
Governments of different stripes spend differently according to their values. Progressive governments tend to spend more on welfare, healthcare, and the environment, whereas more conservative governments spend more on defence, security, and tax cuts. To understand Australia's debt, let's do a quick debrief of the last 15 years. Australia's last surplus was back in 2007.
We are calling it iPhone.
But then the global financial crisis hit. That forced the Rudd Labor government to spend a record amount of money at the time to stimulate the economy, to prevent it from falling into recession.
The purpose of the surplus is to deal with tough times ahead.
Since then, various governments have promised to deliver a surplus, but they never quite got there. The current government came very close to a surplus, largely because Australia was selling record amounts of iron ore to China. But COVID-19 threw a spanner in the works and plunged Australia into its first recession in nearly 30 years. The Morrison government had little choice but to throw everything at the economy by spending big on stimulus programs like JobKeeper and JobSeeker. So will the next generation be hit with a bigger tax bill? Well, yes, according to some economists, but not necessarily because of our COVID debts.
We've got an ageing population. That means is that we have more people in that kind of retiree group. We're going to have fewer working age people to support them. We know climate change is going to put some longer term structural pressures on the budget. And that means in the long term, it probably actually will be necessary for taxes to rise or spending to fall to try and manage that. But that's really because of those longer term pressures, not because of the COVID debt per se.
So, in summary, Australia's deficit is not a disaster, as both sides of politics have claimed. Future generations may be hit with a bigger tax bill, but that's more because of our ageing population, as opposed to simply our current COVID debt.